Done. Thanks to my technical director. I have no idea how this thing's work. You become like techno dumb. Anyways, so what was I saying? Parshas Bo. So we are, if you remember last week, we had a pretty intense class last week. Remember? We had a conversation how the plagues, the makos, in the times of Egypt, when they were leaving Egypt, we connected them, the Kabbalistic concepts, to the 10 Sephirot. Remember? We said the first 7 of the plagues are connected to the emotional elements within our soul, right? We have Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. I won't bother saying them in English, but you know what I'm talking about. Each attribute represented a different element within the plagues, and each plague had to help us work through those different elements of our soul. Do you remember what I said last week? That according to Kabbalah, why are the 3 plagues, the last 3 plagues, the locusts, the darkness, and the death of the firstborn, why are those in the Parshas Bo? Why are they in a separate parsha? Who remembers?
To do with the head.
Yeah, those are representative in Keser, Chachma, Bina. Those are representative in the intellectual elements of our soul. So that's taking it very deep, and we spoke about this last week, right? How the Torah, it's like layer upon layer upon layer. We can go basic, we can go so deep, we can connect it to the blueprint of our lives, to our psyche, to our the makeup of who we are. Today we're going to focus on something a little bit different, even though we're going to talk about the second 3 plagues. But before we do that, let me take this moment to welcome everybody. Hello, Karen and Gittel, Svetlana, Lana, Sandy, Nona, welcome back. And Judith, hi. And I forgot your name, Michelle? Did I make that up? Yeah, not bad. You're muted, but I'm waving. And Bella, Cynthia, Maya, Bonnie, Rita, and I don't know who Michelle is, but I guess I'll find out soon. And in our live class, we have Berta and Hilda and Rachela. Who else just came? We're small today, but small but strong. So we're going to go and open up our Chumash to Shemos. We're going to do our songs. Isn't it amazing how we've been singing Parshas Bereshis Chumash Bereshis for so long, and you probably just know the Parshas by heart, right? Yes. From all the singing, right, Bella? All right, let's do it.
Wishful thinking.
What is it?
Wishful thinking.
Wishful thinking. Every drop helps. You'll see. One day you're going to be able to rattle off all 52 Parshas. Bereshis Noach Lech Lecha Vayirach Hayesara Toldos. Bereshis Noach Lech Lecha Vayirach Hayesara Toldos. Vayetze Vayishlach Vayeshev Miketz Vayigash Vayechi. Book number 2. Shemos Va'era. And here's the parsha. Bo, 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 b'shalach Yisro mishpatim. Shemos va'era. Bo, 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 b'shalach Yisro mishpatim. Teruma, titzave, kisisa, vayakel pekudei. So we're in Parshas Bo, which begins on page 398. And let me open up my Chumash, page 398 in the orange Chumash. By the way, just by raise of hands, who here does not have a Chumash? Cynthia, do you want a Chumash? You can, first of all, I encourage every single one of you to buy one. I think it's every Jewish home should have Chumash, a Siddur, a Tehillim, Psalms, right? Jewish home should be filled with Jewish books. So if you don't have one, you should buy one. This is a good one. If you don't want to buy one, or you want to buy this, you want to borrow this specific one, I'll be happy to lend it to you. This is the one we use. So if you just private message me after class, if you want to borrow or you want to buy, I will be happy to assist you. But it's good to have a Chumash.
Is it possible to pick one up tomorrow when I pick up the Hollis stuff?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Send me a message and I'll be happy. I'll have a stack of chumashim that you can borrow. So we are on page 390. What did I say? 348.
99.
398. We're on the wrong parsha. Okay, so on Parshas Bo, we are in the middle of the 10 plagues, right? And what were the names of the 3 of the last 10 plagues? Anybody remember?
No.
Well, what was the last plague? How about that?
Killing of the firstborn.
Killing of the firstborn. Everybody remembers the killing of the firstborn. Now, why is it why does everybody remember that plague? What is so unique about the plague of the killing of the firstborn that you might not know the rest of them, but everybody knows the killing of the firstborn, right? Why? What is it? Terrible. Bertha says it's terrible. It's a terrible plague. In fact, if you take a look at the first of the 9 plagues, one could, sorry, my notes here. One could think, here we go. Would you say that the plagues, the makos, were they a punishment or was it an education to the Egyptians? Which one would you choose?
Punishment.
Why would you say punishment?
Everything was destroyed. Their crops, their animals. I'm repiping my home, so there's a lot of noise. I'm gonna make myself.
So you're saying that there was destruction, there was loss. Okay, there's an element there of punishment. But what about
so that they know
what about
bad things happen to us with you?
in essence, there could have been any plague, right? Hashem could do anything. I mean, it's pretty creative plagues he thought up of. In all the children's books, the gory details, the pictures. Today they make plagues in a bag for kids. I mean, the plagues, they're well thought out. They're good ones, so to speak. But Hashem could have done any. Why did Hashem specifically choose to, like Gitzel says, punish? But that's up for discussion. These particular ones.
The plagues also did teach us a lot. And in fact, when a mixed multitude came out of Egypt with the Hebrew people, they were to teach those mixed multitude that came out.
Right.
What Hashem was really trying to tell the people. It was very much an education in that aspect for the people that were going to leave.
That is correct. Michelle shares with us a very true point that there was a small group of Egyptians that took it as a learning lesson from the plagues, and they actually converted to Judaism, if that even was an element at that time. But they made that commitment because they were all going to receive the Torah, and they left out of Egypt with the Jewish people. They're known in Hebrew as the Erev Rav. Have you heard of that before? The Erev Rav. There was by the way, just so you know, later on, the ones who initiated a lot of the problems in the desert were these Erev Rav. They were the ones who tried to convince them to make the golden calf. They were the ones who complained about the manna. They complained about the water. They complained about the meat. They were the kvetchers. They were the ones who initiated a lot of the complaining in the desert. But that's a separate discussion. But Michelle is correct that a lot of the plagues were there not only to punish. And by the way, there's a lot of mixed discussion amongst the commentaries and amongst our sages about what was the purpose of the plagues. Was it to punish or was it to educate? So in this week's Parsha, you say educate. Don't mess. Rachel says, God wanted to teach, don't mess. Well, the truth is, there was that element. And if you think about it, the Jewish people, the Egyptians, right? They, for example, they worship the Nile, right? That was their god, or they had in general so many different gods. They worshiped the constellation of Aries, which is represented by the sheep. That's why the killing of the sheep, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, why that was like literally like so painful for the Egyptians. But more importantly, like to understand, the Egyptians, they worshiped the Nile. So when Hashem went and struck the Nile with the blood, they technically, that was teaching them who's in charge, who runs this world. So there was definitely a tremendous educational element in the plagues. So, but in this week's Parsha, we, like Berta correctly said, this terrifying decree of the plagues was the death of the firstborn at midnight. And something different about this plague versus the other ones is that the Jewish people had to take precautions for their own safety. Interesting, no? So that the Jewish firstborns would stay alive. Now, it's important to understand, how did this plague come about, right? There's like a whole production, how each plague comes about. So after the 9th plague ended, Moshe comes to Paro and he tells him that the Jewish people, not comes to Paro. Moshe is summoned to Paro. Paro's like done. Paro summons Moshe and he says the Jewish people can leave Egypt on the condition that their flocks and their cattle stay behind. And Moshe rejects this offer and he tells Paro, not happening. So Paro says to Moshe, get out of my palace. And he says, I never want to see your face again. And Moshe informs Paro right at that moment what the 10th plague is going to be. So look at chapter 11, verse 4. So we skip over a couple of the first pages. It goes through the locust, the darkness. I'm on page number 405. Okay? See on the bottom by the 4th reading, Moses says to Paro, you're with me? Page 405 on the bottom. This is what God said at the dividing point of the night. I will go out into the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt will die, from the firstborn of Parai, who sits on his throne, to the firstborn of the slave woman who is behind their millstones, and firstborn animals too. So do you notice anything a little bit strange about this language? Okay. And by the way, there's a lot of questions just on these verses alone. But let's address a couple of them. Before I go ahead, anybody notice something interesting about the way these verses are written? Something that brings up a question? Something that's a little bit different about this Makkah, this plague, and the other Makkahs?
Hmm.
Yeah, it's the last one. Okay, so let's start like this. First of all, you notice that Moshe says a time. Never said a time before. He says at the dividing point of the night. By the way, in Hebrew, if you look at it in Hebrew, it says kechatzais halayla. You ever heard of that? Chatzais? In Judaism, there's a lot of things that are have to happen at chatzais. There's chatzais in the morning, in the evening, and chatzais in the evening. For example, shachris, the morning prayer, should be done before chatzais, before this dividing point in the day, which is roughly between 12 and 1, depending on the day, depends on when nighttime falls. But roughly afternoon. The morning prayer should be done before chatzais. My brother his wife just had a baby. I was talking to him yesterday. He's making it very early in the morning, and I'm like, oh, it's so early. It's like 8 o'clock in the morning. So I asked him, why is he doing it so early? Except that there are people who have to obviously go out to work. Some people work in Brooklyn. Not everybody works here. I know work is I was like, work? What's that? But he was telling me that my father has to leave to work, and he was going through his friends that will work. So he says, and also it's a mitzvah to do it before chatzais. Bris should be done as early in the morning before chatzais. This word chatzais is used in Jewish law, very often. Certain things have to be done before chatzais. Now, in the evening time, chatzais halayla, dividing half of the night, is also roughly between 12 and 1. But every night there's a certain moment of chatzais. It's known that happens. So, and I'm going to address this a little bit more about what makes chatzais so interesting. But if you look at the Hebrew, see in the English, it says at the dividing point of the night. But for those that read Hebrew, Hashem says, Moshe says, Vayomer Moshe, Kayamar Hashem, so says Hashem, kachatzais halayla. He doesn't say at chatzais, at the dividing point. He uses the letter kaf, kechatzais. Do you know what a kaf means in Hebrew? Kaf, the letter kaf, is like. In other words, approximate, not specific. Bam, the clock strikes chatzais, and that's what's going to happen. This is kechatzais halayla. Just so you know, it's going to happen roughly around chatzais, roughly around midnight. So that's interesting, number one, that he says a time. There's no other makkah, no other plague that he says a time. That's number one. Number two,
I'm sorry, in America, it's like 7-ish.
I don't know if it's America or if it's Jewish time.
Yes, probably.
You know, 7-ish, Jewish, you know. So the ish, that's correct. Now, what was so unique about this 10th plague that the time needed to be given? Why was that important? Why did that matter? And by the way, something interesting as well is the warnings, like before each of the plagues, it was actually a very interesting pattern that we're not going to get into right now, but just to give you context, is like the first 2 plagues had a warning before it. The third one happened with no warning. The 4th and 5th had a warning, the 6th didn't. The 7th and 8th had a warning, the 9th didn't. And finally, the 10th has a warning. So the warnings are very interesting. Why certain ones had warnings, why certain ones different. But this one didn't just have a warning, it had a time. Also, specifically, before we examine Rashi's explanation, Rashi is the first commentator, of Pshat, of the basics of the Torah. Before we examine why he uses the word about midnight, why did he have to say kichatzais? Why couldn't he just say at midnight? And like Rita said, maybe this was the birth of Jewish time. You know, this is when Jewish time began, when he said kichatzais. So Rashi offers 2 explanations, okay? The first explanation that Rashi says, and we're not going to read it inside right now, but I'll tell it to you orally, is Rashi says we have to look at the word chatzais, kichatzais, as a verb. Not as it's a noun like at midnight, but as a verb. In other words, Moshe meant to tell Parai that the plague would begin when the night changes from the first part of the evening to the second part of the evening, which leads to the morning. So in other words, kichatzais is not referring to a time, it's referring to a movement, a verb. When it's going to change from the first half of the night to the second half of the night, that's when it's going to be. That's Rashi's first explanation. We're just starting to scratch the surface. Rashi gives a second explanation. He says, no, it's not a verb, it's actually a noun. And it is understood to mean about midnight. Not at exactly 11:59, 12:02, but roughly about. So Rashi explains why this vagueness, why couldn't he be more exact? Says that Moshe was worried that if, according to the Egyptians' calculations, the plague would have occurred a minute or 2 earlier or a minute or 2 later, they would have used it against him. And in order to be avoided from being called a liar, Moshe had no choice, but he gave them an approximate time when the firstborn would be killed and not an exact time. But if Moshe was so worried, right, about being called a liar, why give a time at all? He has to say a time of when it's going to happen. Better for him to just completely omit the time, like he did with all the other plagues. He didn't give a time by all the other makkahs. So we have to conclude that in spite of this potentially damaging accusation that could be against Moshe, he was compelled to give a time because there must have been a deeper reason. There has to be a deeper reason of why he had to give a time that was directly connected with the plague itself. And by the way, something also interesting, he doesn't give a date. You ever heard of someone says, I have a doctor's appointment at 1:40. Really? What day? Doesn't give a date. He only gives a time. So in other words, the time itself is very essential. So let's explore a little bit deeper, okay? There was another unique aspect of this plague that they did not have to do by the other plagues. FedEx. The Jewish people, by all the other plagues, they observed it, right? They were just observers. They didn't have a part of it. This is the only plague that the Jews had to take preventive measures, right? Remember what were those preventive measures? To protect them. To put the blood on the doorpost. Let's read inside. Chapter 12, verse number 5. So that is on page 409. So the first commandment, you're with me, page 409, chapter 12, verse number 5. It says, but if the, where are we? You have a perfect unblemished male lamb or kid in its first year. You may take either sheep or goat. You should hold it for inspection until the 14th day of the month. They had to do this for 4 days. And then the entire congregation of the community of Israel shall have it slaughtered in the afternoon. And they shall take some of its blood and put it on the 2 doorposts on the lintel of the houses in which they will be eating. By the way, this is the first time, if you read it in Hebrew, that the word mezuzot are mentioned, the word mezuzah. If you look at the verse in Pasuk Zayin, in verse number 7, v'lakhu min hadam v'nasnu al shtei hamezuzot. I just taught this week in Hebrew school. This is the source, the first time we hear the word mezuzah. Then move on to verse number 12 on the bottom of the page. I will pass through the land of Egypt on this night, and I will smite every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And upon all the gods of Egypt, I will perform acts of judgment. I, God, will do this personally. The blood will be for you as a sign upon the house where you are. I will see the blood and skip over you. There will be no plague to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So which blood was specifically used for the marking on the doorpost? So number 1, it was for the blood of the lamb that they had to slaughter. And according to the Midrash, it was also from the blood of the bris milah that was performed that night. The Jewish people had to circumcise themselves before becoming a Jewish nation. And they had to circumcise themselves. And the Midrash says that the blood from the bris milah was also used on the doorpost. Something interesting. But more specifically, because in the Midrash it tells us that inside. Thank you so much. Because one of the explanations in the Midrash is given that because of the when in a sense there was no merit. The Jews, like Gitzel, you mentioned last week, the 49 levels of Tumah, they had sunk so low in the impurities of Egypt that nothing was there. There was no there was nothing there that they could say, in this merit they redeemed them. But Hashem had to keep his promise that he told to Avram, right? When Hashem told Avram 210 years earlier that he would redeem his people, his children. So Hashem gave them the mitzvah of the Karban Pesach, the blood of the animal, and the mitzvah of bris milah, which they performed that night, that gave them merit. But here's something interesting. They had to put the blood on the doorpost, but what's interesting is that once they put it on their doorpost, they weren't allowed to leave their home. Why couldn't they leave their houses? Correct. So the Jewish people would be protected from death by the angel of death. But again, no other plague did they need to mark themselves. How did the blood, a Jew could drink water and his was regular and the Egyptian had blood on it? How come there was no marking then? How did it turn into water and that turned into blood? So we need to understand, more importantly, what was so unique about this plague that they had to take all these precautions. They had to have the bris milah. They had to slaughter the lamb. They had to take the blood on the doorpost. They had to stay indoors all night. They were separating the Jews. All right, so there's three differences to recap of the 10th plague and all the other plagues. Number one, a time. There was never a time by the other plagues. Here, there's a time. Kechatzais halayla, roughly around midnight. Number two, there was no need by the other plagues to identify who had the Jewish homes. This plague, the Jewish homes were identified with the markings of the blood. Hashem could do anything though. Yeah. Number three, there was no need to stay indoors by any of the other plagues. They could roam the streets. Lions were roaming. No lion touched them. This plague, they had to stay indoors until morning when the plague was over. So these are three very interesting differences between the last plague. All right, now that we asked a bunch of questions, let's go a little bit deeper. Let's get some answers. Let's try to understand, because we know there's obviously a deeper message. We started off this conversation about the purpose of the plagues. Was it there to educate or was it there to punish? So we have to understand that even though the first of the 9 plagues were harmful to the Egyptians, the destructive force within the plague was very specific. It could only cause harm and destruction in a very limited way. Take, for example, the locusts, right? The devastation caused by the locusts was limited to only the damage that locusts can cause, destroying crops and vegetation. They did not eat other animals. They did not attack human beings. In contrast, the 10th plague was the one that was going to cause death to the firstborn, but it wasn't going to limit how they were going to die. In other words, this destructive angel, the Malach HaMaves, was instructed to carry out a mission that once the force of killing, of death, was unleashed, it couldn't be contained. So the sole purpose of the first of the 9 plagues was making the Egyptian aware that there's a God in the world. Paro started off in the beginning and he says, who is this God? Who's God anyway? By the end of the 9 plagues, they were very well aware that there is a God in this world. In fact, if you go back into Va'era in chapter 7, Hashem says, with this you will know that I am Hashem. And that's why by the first Makkah, by the first plague, he says, I will smite with the staff that's in my hand, the water that's in the Nile, and it will turn to blood. In other words, each time it's very much referring to the fact that, hello, there's a God here. Also by the plague of Aroi, for example, in Parshas Va'era, Hashem says, I will separate on that day the land of Goshen upon which my people stand, and there will be no mixture of the animals, in order that you will know, we're not reading it inside, but I'm reading it for you from chapter 8, that I am Hashem, that there's a God on this earth. So the God of the Egyptians, like we spoke about earlier in Parshas Va'era, this was expressed in the Nile River. They did not recognize that Hashem had an authority. So this was a wake-up call. The first 9 plagues was a wake-up call that there's a God in this world. That was Hashem's way of introducing himself to the Egyptians. So the main purpose of the 9 plagues was to educate. Yes, there was harm. Yes, there was destruction. But the main thing was to educate them that there was an existence of God in this world. And that Hashem intervenes. When there's problems, Hashem intervenes and takes care of it. So now, coming specifically to the 10th plague, they did not, by the way, side point, Jewish people did not need an education. It says about the Jewish people, Maminim b'nei Maminim. Jews are believers, the children of believers. You know, anybody who's an atheist, you're still a believer. It says that the children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they have within them a sense of belief. Whether we feel it, whether we argue it, There's something inside of each and every one of us that we have a belief in Hashem, whether we are in tune or not. So the first 9 plagues did not have any bearings on them in regards to education. They didn't need that education that there's a God in the world. They believed it. Were they happy with Hashem? Not necessarily, but they believed that there was a Hashem. In contrast, the 10th plague was there to punish. While it may be true that by the time the 10th plague came, the Egyptians knew and believed, yes, there is a God in this world, and they obviously felt Hashem's presence. This was the only plague that resulted in people dying. And because the truth is that the Egyptians had ignored the plague, the warnings, so many warnings that they received, and now was actually time to punish them. They failed Hashem's educational program very well. He had an education program and they failed. Time for the punishment. Now, what happened at the plague of the firstborn? There was this force of destruction that was released into the world, and the Jewish people had to take precaution because this destruction, this force, is primarily controlled by what we know in Hebrew as Midas Hadin, which is known as the attribute of judgment. How many attributes does Hashem have?
13.
How many?
13.
13, very good. We say this, a very famous prayer on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We sing it. We say Adoshem, Adoshem, Kel Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim. Sounds familiar? Rav Chesed V'Emes, right? It's a famous. What are we saying? We're imploring on Hashem's 13 attributes to give us a good year. I'm talking about Rosh Hashanah. But this is a famous thing. Hashem has 13 attributes. So this attribute of judgment, Hashem has kinder ones, but Hashem has an element of judgment, a Midas Hadin. And by the way, interestingly enough, each name of Hashem is connected to a different one of his attributes. The Midah of Din, the attribute of judgment, which name of Hashem is it connected to? Just like side point. Give me, what are some of the names that you know of Hashem? You ever heard of the name of Hashem Elokim?
That's justice.
That's the attribute of Jim. Attribute of Din. We say Hashem Hu Elokim. Hashem Hu Elokim. Elokim. I'm saying Kim instead of the Hey because you can't say Hashem's name in vain. Elokim is Midas Hadin, the attribute of judgment. So the attribute of judgment, when it's tasked with a task to look for anyone who deserves to die because of their sins, it makes no distinction between the totally wicked and the totally righteous. And in our context, Jew and Egyptian. If a Jew has sinned, which I'm sure many of them have, there's no protection plan. Midas Hadin is unleashed into the world. You got to take precautions. Maimonides, the Rambam, explains it as the following way. He writes, I'm going to read it to you. The reason why the Jews were cautioned not to go out from their houses on the night of the 10th plague was because Hashem passed through Egypt, listen to this, like a king who is moving from one place to another, and his guards go before him to ensure that nobody meets or sees him. In other words, when the Rambam is telling us is that in general, when a king goes, right, the guards who protect the king have a duty to protect him. The king doesn't specify how to do it. They just know they got to protect the king. So it's possible that there's some innocent bystanders who might be caught up in the maneuvers to protect the king. So it's advisable for everybody to stay indoors for the king to move around. This is the parable that the Rambam, that Maimonides gives. So in other words, Hashem on this night of the Exodus gives instruction to this Malach HaMavis, to this destroying angel. And he says, I want you to kill all the Egyptian firstborns. And the reason is because they deserve to be punished and die. Now, while fulfilling this task, there could be some Jews walking around that can get caught up in the process, and they too can get killed, even though they weren't intended to be the target. And according to Midas Hadin, according to this attribute of justice, by the way, and according to the Zohar, some of the Jews actually deserve to die. Zohar is the first book that was written on Kabbalah, on the esoteric meaning of the Torah. And it says that, in fact, the Jewish people were standing at the Red Sea, and Hashem was about to split it for them. There was the angel of Egypt. Every country has an angel. The angel of Egypt, he was known as Rachav. You ever heard of this? Rachav was the angel of Egypt. And he comes to Hashem and he demands justice. And he says, Master of the world, why do you punish the Egyptians and divide the sea for the Jews? Haven't the Jews also sinned? They were idol worshippers, some of them. And so are the Egyptians. Why are you making the differentiation? So the Jews had to take precautionary measures. And in spite of the fact that the goal of the destructive angel, the goal of the Malach HaMavis was there to destroy the Egyptian firstborns, the Jewish people were not completely safe. And because it was coming from the attribute of justice, they would have been justified if they would have killed a Jew here or there. So they had to remain indoors and put the blood on their doorposts. Now, on a technical level, what's the sign? The sign's going to help. The angel's going to see a sign. He's going to be like, oh, this is the thing. So, and what's this thing about staying indoors? Like death is only you only could die outside. You can't die inside. In other words, if they're going to stay in all night, that's going to help them. Like the angel can't find his way indoors. What's this idea of staying indoors? So something interesting, very interesting here is that the final blow to the Egyptians, right? This final last blow to the Egyptians came from Hashem himself. Hashem, while Hashem has attributes, one of them being justice or judgment, Hashem, God, is above that, right? Obviously, Hashem is above nature. Hashem is above attributes. Hashem is above anything logical on the rule of law. In other words, we could say, okay, you want to say that the attribute of justice is going to be unleashed into the world and accidentally, because the way justice works, it could kill anybody, because if you deserve to die, you deserve to die. No differentiation between the Egyptian and the Jew. Hashem is above that. Hashem can do whatever he wants. So if Hashem is above the midah of din, above the attribute of justice, like, by the way, it says in the Haggadah, right? When we read the Haggadah on Pesach, it says that Hashem took us out of Egypt. This implies that it was not an angel or a messenger, but Hashem himself. So it was very essential that as Hashem released this angel of judgment, this destroying angel, that Hashem take personal control, so to speak, to make sure that no unnecessary damage was done. Understand? The angel of death could do a lot of harm right now, because according to attribute of judgment, it can be killing anybody. So you have over here something very interesting. On the one hand, you have Hashem is playing his role. It says Hashem took us out of Egypt. Hashem, above logic, above the rules of the world, Hashem took us out. On the other hand, we have this very strict force of justice carrying out this punishment, irrespectively to who they are, Jew or Egyptian. So, in other words, in a normal circumstance, whatever that means anyway, in normal circumstance, if it was decreed that the destructive forces, Hashem gave them permission to destroy, right? Because Hashem's in charge. If he gave them permission to destroy, it can affect anybody. It can affect the righteous, it can affect the tzaddik, it can affect the rasha. Only Hashem, who's above this attribute, who makes that law, can protect those that he chooses to. So in our case, Hashem did so by commanding us to put the blood of the bris milah, of the circumcision, and of the lamb on the doorpost. And that is why we now see that during the time of the plague of the firstborn, there were two forces at play. There was the force of Gevorah, that's one of the 10 attributes of our soul, of justice, that was based upon logic, and there was the force wishing to protect us against any accusations made against the Jewish people, and that came from the attribute of chesed, of kindness. And with this in mind, we can now explain why did the plague have to start at chatzos, at midnight. So Hasidic philosophy explains that midnight is the exact moment when you have chesed and gevurah combined in the world. You ever heard of this before? At the time of the plague, it was necessary for the plague to take place at midnight, because when the evening begins up until chatzos, the midah of gevurah is very prominent. In fact, by the way, I don't know if you ever heard this. If you say a person should say Tehillim, Psalms every day, it says you shouldn't say Tehillim at night, because the midah of gevurah, of strictness, of justice, of judgment, is very strong in the evening. Now, obviously, if a person's sick, you say, and Tehillim is the only thing you want to say, say it whenever. Hashem hears all our tefillahs. But there's a thing that if you're saying your Tehillim of the day, which you shouldn't say that in the evening. You should finish it before nightfall. Midnight strikes, or the first half of evening strikes, it switches over to chesed. That's what happens. So, generally speaking, right, two opposites can't unite at the same time, right? One must make way for the other. But if there's any force that is capable of achieving this, then it has to be something or someone that is above the two forces that are fighting, right? Can't be the force itself, but something above that force. It must be a force that's not restricted to any limitations of time and space, which in any case is Hashem. So only Hashem can unite two opposites, can unite chesed and gevurah at the same time, which is midnight. Because chesed is taking over and gevurah is leaving. So the reason Hashem decided that Exodus should take place, the reason why the Exodus took place at a time where chesed and gevurah was combined was because Hashem wanted to show his eternal love for the Jewish people. In spite of the fact that normally this destroying angel would take its toll from amongst all those that were in its way, Hashem intervened and protected the Jewish people. And he wanted this demonstration to take place in front of Paro's eyes. So the essential reason of the plagues was to educate the Egyptians, to show them that there's a God and that their gods don't exist, and that their gods don't even exist, that Hashem, in other words, that Hashem, who he was trying to educate them about this thing, that Hashem is above nature. That's the way Hashem operates. Hashem is above nature. The same Hashem who created nature is above nature. And this was demonstrated clearly with this 10th plague, because on the one hand, the destructive angel, right, which is based mostly on gevurah, was given permission to operate indiscriminately, right? It can go and kill. But on the other hand, there was divine intervention that stopped it from having any effect on the Jewish people. And this was something that only Hashem could combine gevurah, destroy, chesed, not the Jews. So during this 10th plague, Hashem displayed a tremendous love for the Jewish people. And this important lesson about the love that Hashem portrayed, or just in general, the miracle that Hashem did, was demonstrated not only by what it was, but specifically by the time, the kechatzos of when it actually happened. You're with me so far? You ready to go a little deeper?
But it's too difficult to understand. I have a question.
Yeah, hold on one second. Berta, what?
But it's too difficult to understand. Why should we just
But excellent. That leads us to our next question. Berta wants to know, but why do I have to put blood on the doorpost? It could be without this. There's other ways for it to happen. Give me one moment. We're going to talk about that right now. Bella, your question.
You say that Gevorah and Hesed are combined. Can we say that these two forces were in balance at the time, in harmony? Is that the same?
You can use the word balance, yeah, but it's unusual. In other words, they were both very prominent. In other words, if you have death, there's no chesed in that. It's complete. It's, Teferes is the balance. Abyssal.
That was my next.
Yeah. In this case, it was both strongly in its full element. Full Gevorah, death, destruction, and full chesed.
They have to be in balance, otherwise,
yeah,
one is more than other. Okay.
Yeah. It's
So
not simple. It's not simple.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else have a question before we move on? So we learned so far that everything that we learned so far helps us understand the nature of this plague, right? And how it affected Paro and Egypt. But like Berta asks, why did the Jews have to go to such great lengths to protect themselves? Especially, by the way, is Hashem could do anything. Hashem could do whatever he wants. He has the ability to demonstrate his ability to destroy and simultaneously impress Paro without the Jewish people marking their homes. What's this purpose that Hashem says you have to mark your homes? It's like, we're so funny. This is like a side point, but we limit Hashem. We do this, by the way, all the time within the laws of nature. Hashem created, just like Hashem created the laws of the attribute of justice, Hashem created the laws of nature. But Hashem could do anything. Hashem could make somebody better if he wants to, because he's the same one who created laws of nature that says the person's dying in 5 minutes. This is true, but he could have selected them without them marking it. By the way, interesting point, which I want to address later, is, and I want you to save this concept in mind, is that we limit Hashem all the time in our lives. We live in this, we think Hashem is finite. So we think, let's say, God forbid, a person is sick, we give up hope. But the same God that made Hashem sick can make them better. It's so easy for him. It doesn't even take, it's not even stressful for him. Which is an interesting thing to think about, which this is, by the way, I'm going off tangent, but I'll bring this back up later because I want to mention something. But specifically, why did the Jewish people need a sign on their doorpost? Why do you think the Jewish people had to do something?
They were assimilated.
Okay, so Berta says to show the Egyptians that Hashem was selecting them. What do you say, Sandy?
The Jews lived among the Egyptians for a long time, and they were assimilated.
Okay,
And therefore, who was a Jew and who really wasn't?
Okay.
It's something where you determine whether or not you actually were a Jew, and you mark your doorpost, or you don't.
But Hashem knows who's
Ask you a real quick question. Firstborn, did that include women?
Say again?
The firstborn of when the firstborn was killed, did that include females as well as males?
No, it was the firstborn son.
Why?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer.
So in other words, if a woman was born first and the son was born second, the son would be killed.
No, I think it was the first, only if the home had a son as the firstborn. And when we were kids, we would joke, because my sister is the oldest in the family. We have a boy second. We always would joke on Pesach, oh, Hinda, you saved Chaim, from if you would have been in the times of Egypt, like it was always the joke, like thank God for the families that had a girl first. But it's an interesting question, and I'm sure there's answers. Let me look that up because I'm sure it's been addressed. Yes,
Males can take
who's talking?
Karen.
Oh, Karen, sorry.
So if you think about the male, they're the ones that inherit everything. The first son, they're the one that takes over for the father. They're the ones that they're important. Not that other children aren't important, but think about like the king in England, the firstborn son, the firstborn becomes king after his father. I know they have queens, but I mean, males were always important. I mean,
I'll tell you why what you're saying, similar to what Ruff was saying about woman liberation. The reason that's
that was 2,000 years ago. They didn't have women's liberation.
No, the reason I may disagree with you is Torah is timeless. Torah is not like, oh, it took place a couple thousand years ago. There was no women's liberation. Men were important. So the men, there's no such a thing as women's liberation within Judaism. A woman has always been important and always will be important.
Okay, but did the women have the same role? Do they have the same role? What do you do? You have the children, your husband's the rabbi, your husband's the one who takes care of the family. I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, but
let me ask you a question.
Family is how it's always been.
So hold on one second. First of all, the fact that the women have the children, that is actually one of the reasons why Judaism is determined by the mother. Patriarchal lineage goes according to which tribe you're from, goes according to the father. If you're Jewish, goes according to the mother. You can have a father that's Jewish, your also important role that you talk about, and a mother that's not Jewish, and the child isn't Jewish.
But that's not the role I'm talking about.
What I'm trying to explain to you is
I know exactly what you're saying, and I understand that, but maybe I'm not explaining myself.
No, what I'm trying to say is that there's no role. The word important is a dangerous word.
Okay, then that's the wrong word.
Yeah, it's a different role.
Who inherited the lands? Did the women inherit the lands then?
The land was inherited by tribes. Tribes go according to the father, but just saying, Bella, I'll get to you in a second, is that there was we'll get to it, in one of the parshas coming up in the desert, there was the Benos Slavchad. You heard of Benos Slavchad?
Somebody's playing music.
Benos Slavchad, what was Slavchad? He had passed away in the desert, and he didn't have any sons. So his daughters came to Moshe and they complained. They said, we don't have any brothers. Does that mean that we're not going to get a portion in the land of Israel because it was being divided according to the tribes? And Moshe came to Hashem and he says, what do? I got a problem. Hashem says, not only are they correct, they will absolutely inherit a part of the land. And they were women. So, and it's unbelievable. Hashem talks in the Torah, it goes into unbelievable explanation. When we get to that parsha, I'm going to address it.
But the Egyptians weren't Jewish. You're explaining all this as Jewish law, as the way the Jews are.
Yeah, but at the same time,
is that the way it was for the Egyptians?
The protection of the Jewish people were for the firstborn sons as well. In other words, till today, there's I was telling you about our childhood, why we would always joke about this, because do you know that the day before Pesach, firstborn sons have to fast? Anyone who is a firstborn son has to fast because he was protected from his role was protected at the time of Egypt. So it was the firstborn sons within the Jews that were protected, and it was the firstborn sons within the Egyptians. There was no difference. Bella, what were you going to say?
How I understand it, it's not a matter who's first or second. The male force, which is associated with Chokmah, is the initiating force, and woman is always on the Dina side as the receiving force. So there is no way of one or second. It's different forces that combined together produce life and continuation.
Absolutely. You couldn't have summed it up better. And this is the Torah's view. This is Kabbalah's view. And you're talking based, of course, also with your knowledge of Tanya, is that the male force, and by the way, we have both within us, but we're predominantly one force by the made of who we are. The male force is Chachma, is the initiator. And we see that biologically as well, right? In the birth of creation, the man contributes something. The woman receives it and creates the child. Just to give you on a biological. This also is very much in, but it's a true thing. Not just physically, emotionally, woman in a relationship, a healthy relationship, a woman is the receiver and the man is the giver. Not that a woman doesn't give, but most women feel fulfilled when they receive, and men feel fulfilled when they give. That's the nature of the way Hashem gave us. We could have a marriage class for 2 hours now just discussing it. But my point is, like Bella correctly said, is that each role is its own role. And if I may say this off topic, one of the frustrations, I believe, that goes on in the world today is that we're all into equal rights, which is a big problem where women are mistreated or, whatever it is. But taking that aside, let's not confuse equal with different. Women shouldn't want to be a man and man shouldn't want to be a woman. It doesn't mean that women and men can't do each other's roles. I mean, come to my house when my husband, watches the kids. The house looks a little different, but that's fine. But I want to tell you, if I had to do what he had to do every day, that would be disaster. But there's also the idea of embracing your role, embracing who you are. And so many people in the world, and hopefully it's coming back, try their whole life to not only push away who they are, but to try to be a role that they're not. But if we would focus on who we actually are, the way Hashem created us, we would be each of us, each role would be such powerful forces uniting as one and creating this world to be a place of harmony. How it was created. We're so far removed from godliness and from the way Hashem created us that we messed our world up. But if we focused on who we are and being the best version of ourselves, the world would be in a healthier place. Now, I don't know if this answers why the firstborn sons were killed. There's for sure a reason, Sandy. I'm going to look it up. But one thing I know is that I was just happy that it wasn't me. When I was a kid, that was, growing up and learning the story, I was like, oh, thank God it was the boys. But I'm sure there's a reason. And that's, by the way, another interesting perspective on Judaism's outlook on male and female roles. In other words, instead of saying, why can't I be like the other? I say, thank God I'm not the other. Seriously, we need to focus. Hello. We need to focus on, thank God I am who I am. Thank God I'm not the other, and embrace who we are. I find it interesting now that we're having the conversation that I wasn't so concerned, again, as a child. I'm talking about like from a child's perspective about why it wasn't us. I was just so happy it wasn't us. So what's my point of sharing this? Not that your question is wrong, Sandy. I love the question. I'm going to do that investigation for you because it's a good question and I'm curious to know what the answer is. I'm just trying to bring a perspective it's important in life. And again, we went off a tangent unrelated to the topic. It's important in life to embrace, to ask ourselves, what is my role? That doesn't mean that we're supposed to be barefoot in the kitchen, pregnant. That's not a role. That's a misconception. And that's where the women's liberation came about, which, by the way, in a healthy way, brought about some great changes that needed to be done. The problem is that the pendulum swung too far. And now nobody knows who they are. So that's another topic, right? Anyways, thanks, Sandy, for asking that question. But I'm asking you, I asked you a question, and Sandy, I asked you, why do the Jews have to mark their walls? Why do they have to make a sign? Hashem could do anything. Hashem could unleash his power of chesed without them making a marking. So here's something very interesting that applies to our lives every single day. In order to draw down into this physical world a revelation of Hashem, a person has to perform an act of service within the Torah. What do I mean? That even though Hashem has tremendous unconditional love, which is always present and always constant, it requires an appropriate act of love and commitment towards Hashem in order for that love to be revealed. In Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, at the end of Tanya, in the chapter of Igeres HaKodesh, he describes how at the beginning of creation, Hashem had a flow of energy. It's like my son Menzel asked me the other day, Ma, I love Hashem, but who created him? It's always the question we all have. It's a good question. I said, no one created Hashem. If someone created Hashem, then Hashem wouldn't be Hashem. It's a deep question, but it's a good question. And we all struggle with that sometimes. So Hashem created the flow of energy and life, but he didn't need any arousal from below. There's something called Isarusa dilatata, Isarusa dilaela. These are Aramaic words from the Zohar. Have you ever heard of this before? Arousal from below and arousal from above. Only once man was, yes, only once man was created. In other words, Hashem brought about creation because he desired to act with kindness. This is the words of the Tanya. In fact, it says the world is built on kindness. But after the creation of man, of the human being, and our job, like it says in Genesis, it says in Bereshit, was to work the land, we have this lifelong task, the Alter Rebbe writes, to draw down into this world this flow of divine energy. How? Through the arousal from below, a sarusa dilatata. And that means through our own labor of spirituality, in order for us to be worthy of Hashem's kindness, it depends on an arousal from below. And the Tanya writes that this is accomplished through acts of kindness, through tzedakah, that Jews perform around the world. And that's why our sages say in the Talmud, whoever says that he has nothing but Torah, meaning no ma'asim tovim, no kindly good deeds, does not even have Torah. Because one has to engage in the Torah as well as perform acts of loving kindness. In other words, if we don't engage, if we don't arouse, if we don't act, we don't do something about this lovely Torah that we're learning, we cannot arouse the reciprocation of Hashem from above. In fact, the Maggid of Mizrich writes that there's a phrase that says, Da ma l'mayla mimach, know who is above you. This is from the Talmud. Is that you should know that all that comes from above is because of you, not just from you, but because of you. In other words, everything that comes from Hashem is an appropriate response to something we have done. Whatever we do in this world stimulates something to happen from above. And now we can understand why the Jewish people had to mark their doors with this blood by the product of two of the mitzvahs, the bris milah and the Karban Pesach, the Pesach sacrifice. Bris milah, a bris, circumcision, this demonstrates a level to Hashem that's beyond human intellect, right? It's evident because a child's only circumcised at 8 days old. He's not intellectually aware of what's happening. He doesn't have an intellectual opinion about the mitzvah. What is a bris? A bris is a circumcision. It's a covenant above intellect. It's a covenant between the Jew and Hashem that goes beyond rationale, beyond one's decision and choice. The same could be said for the sacrifice, the Pesach sacrifice. The Jewish people were commanded to slaughter the lamb, which was worshipped by the Egyptians as a god. And they knew full well that when they were going to take the lamb and tie it to their bed and slaughter it, that they were going to arouse the anger of the Egyptians. They were putting their lives in danger. Nevertheless, what they did by listening to Hashem was pure Mesiras Nefesh, pure self-sacrifice. And such self-sacrifice is beyond the human intellect. It makes no sense. In fact, the Maimonides, the Rambam, writes in the book of Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed. You heard of that book, the Guide to the Perplexed? Some of you heard of it. It's a book written by the Rambam of Jewish philosophy. And the Rambam writes, the Maimonides writes, that the Torah already told us, according to Targum Onkelos, that the Egyptians worshipped the constellation of the Aries, the sheep, and therefore they forbade the slaughter of the sheep. You knew this? This is the reason why when we were commanded as Jewish people to kill the lamb and to slaughter it, it was in order to cleanse ourselves, the Rambam writes, from false Egyptian belief. This was a false belief of idol worship, and proclaim the opposite, that we believe in Hashem. And that is why, for openly, the Rambam writes, Maimonides writes that because they openly performed this service in front of the Egyptian idol worshippers, they were saved from the destruction of the firstborn. So this act of self-sacrifice, walking in the streets with a lamb, the bris milah, elicited an appropriate response from Hashem, which was manifested in the fact that the Jewish people didn't die in the last plague. Now it's understood why the blood was so appropriate. Why specifically not just the marking, but why it had to go on the doorpost. Why from these two mitzvahs, which represent above teva, above nature, above intellect. So Hashem also acted above intellect and gave it right back down to us. In other words, Hashem's love for the Jewish people overrode the strict justice that they be punished in the same way, right? So where did this love come from? The love was always there, but it was aroused by the intense love that the Jewish people showed to Hashem. And when they fulfilled these two mitzvahs, they behaved in a way that was above measure. So Hashem reciprocated and ensured that the angel of death passed over their homes. And by the way, it refers to our prophet Micha says that when Mashiach is going to come, that it says, just like during the times of Exodus, when the Jewish people left Egypt, Hashem, by the times of Mashiach, is going to redeem us with the same wonders. That there's going to be a parallel. I don't know if you remember last year when we were learning before Pesach, that was our first Zoom class. We were talking about how there's going to be a lot of parallels with the coming of Mashiach, with the redemption, similar to the times of Egypt when the Jewish people were redeemed. And the reward for the Jewish people surviving this 10th plague came from a faith that was super rational, didn't make any sense. So too, our act of self-sacrifice today and our commitment to doing mitzvahs, especially in a very spiritually challenging time that we all live in, we will elicit from Hashem that enough of this gullus, enough of this exile. Come on, let's get over this. Let's usher ourselves into the times of Mashiach when, we've seen enough, we've had enough. But I think most importantly, one of the lessons that I take from this concept is a Jew has to learn or has to embrace or has to remember not to limit themselves in the confines of affinity and nature. We have to live above it. There's so much stress going on in the world with COVID, with politics, right? We live in a world now where there's anxiety, there's concern, there's a lack of rest. And we have to remember that we're not defined by what we see, what meets the eye. Hashem could do anything. It doesn't mean we have to be stupid. We have to live in this world. But there's a phrase in Yiddish, it says, Shtei hecher, rise above. A tefach hecher, just a little rise above. You don't have to live so sunk into the gullus mentality, into the exile mentality. It's all doom and gloom. We rise above. Hashem's in charge. We have to live our lives as a Yid. We have to live our lives as Jews. We have to do what Hashem commands us to. What Hashem says is the best thing for us. To live a life of Torah, to live a life of mitzvahs, to live a life where we live the way Hashem says to live. And Hashem in turn will turn this all around and give us the life that we so desperately need. Just like a small example, like Shabbos, right? On a natural level, we say, it makes no sense that I shouldn't work on Shabbos. I need the money. I have a family to support. I have to pay my rent. According to nature, it makes no sense. But Hashem says, no. 6 days a week you work. On the 7th day, I want you to rest. I want you to take all your problems and throw it up into the air and say, Hashem, you're in charge. You always were in charge. And by the way, if one thing that Corona taught us, Hashem was always in charge. We thought we had an illusion that we were in charge. And one thing that Corona did, it made us realize we never were in charge in the first place. It was an illusion. We thought we were in charge. And then COVID hit, we're like, we're actually not in charge. But the same thing like with Shabbos, right? When we bring Shabbos, for example, into our life, we start to live in a different reality. All of a sudden, it's like, we think I have to do everything. It's all dependent on me. And unfortunately, we don't have time. I prepared a whole nother element. Maybe we have to start to learn every day. I prepared another, good idea, Bella, huh? I prepared another whole concept about the 4 sons of the Haggadah, right? It says by the Pesach Seder, there's the 4 sons. There's the Chacham, the Rasha, the Tam, and the She'eni Lidei Elishal. There's the wise one, there's the wicked one. You know this, everybody knows this, the 4 sons of the Seder. There's the the dumb one and the one who doesn't know how to ask questions. And I lost my train of thought.
The 5th son.
No, I wanted to compare it to one of the sons. Hold on. There's the Tum. Each son struggles with a different element, right? The Chacham is the wise one. If I have to sum it up in 30 seconds, the Chacham is the wise one. He's the one who struggles with intellect. He understands don't kill, don't steal, but you actually what we're talking about right now, but there's a super rational element within godliness. So we address him in one way. Then there's the Rasha. The Rasha, the evil one, is not really a Rasha. The Kabbalah explains he's more of a depressed guy. He doesn't think too highly of himself. So we tell him that Hashem cares about you. We deal with him in one way. But then there's the third one, the Tum. He's the one who thinks that everything happens because he makes it happen. He's the one who makes the world tick. So to him, and this is how it connects to our idea, is that we answer, because each son, we answer him with a different part of the Chumash. To him, it says we answer him b'chayzik yad, with a strong hand. God took us out of Egypt. That's one of the verses in the Torah. Because basically this idea is that on our own, we wouldn't be able to lift a finger, but we were liberated from Egypt because of Hashem's strong arm. We forget who plays the cards. We think we absolutely have free choice. We absolutely have to arouse Hashem's kindness from below. But at the end of the day, Hashem runs the world. So don't let ourselves sink into a life where we're so limited by nature. Rise above, just a tefach, just a shtickle, just a bissel hecher. You'll live life differently. You'll live life differently. All right, a lot of philosophy for 1 week.
Many questions to that.
Many questions, yes. Listen, if a person walks away from learning with more questions, you're doing good. Because if you walk around and you say, all right, I feel good about this one, then you know.
We would like to have answers and we don't have answers.
Well, some answers, just knowing that we can't know is an answer in itself. I want to tell you, Bella, Moshe had the same question as you. The first thing Moshe says when he sees the suffering of the Jewish people, and Hashem asks him, he says, Lama harayisa la'am hazeh. Why are you doing bad to this nation? That was the first question Moshe asked. Why? Why suffering? Good people. Why do bad things to good people? Biggest question in the book that we all have.
World.
Annoying, I agree.
Rivka, we said that Brit Mila was what saved them out of Egypt. I wonder if maybe Shabbos is what will save us now from going out of the Galut.
It's actually very interesting that you say that, because Gittel says maybe just like Brit Mila was the one who saved the Jewish people in Egypt, Gittel says maybe Shabbos will be what will save us and redeem us from this exile. There is a saying that says that if all the Jewish people would keep one Shabbos, just one, Mashiach would come immediately. Rachel is in.
Jew at a time.
Listen, we should, as a group, one Shabbos we should pick, and we should all keep Shabbos for 1 week. What do you think of that? 1 week, one Shabbos. We could even do like a preparation lesson.
Then we all stay home. We don't come to shul.
For one Shabbos.
Okay.
Maybe this Shabbos. We're making challah tomorrow, onto
We
Thursday.
read Torah on Saturday and Shabbos.
I want to tell you, reading the Torah is a very important. You're saying you could read Torah?
You could.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
could.
yeah, you could do it. Yeah, the mitzvah of keeping Shabbos is one of the most important mitzvahs there are. I'll be happy to do a crash course on keeping Shabbos if you all want to choose 1 week that you keep Shabbos. It's not so hard, by the way, as long as you prepare in advance. Or we could just have a Shabbaton. You all come to my house and we could all just have like a sleepover. Now that would be fun.
Yeah.
Think about it. It's not so hard. You can do it. You can do it. On that note, I wish you a lovely, lovely week. And I'll see hopefully all of you tomorrow at the pickup for the challah bake boxes. If you need it to be delivered to your home, if you're not leaving your home, please private message me. I'd be happy to arrange. There are some volunteers that have graciously agreed. So just send me a message. If you have not signed up yet, I think everyone here has. Judith, I don't think you. I'm like looking at all the names. It's gonna be fun. I'm excited.
My challah will be disaster.
Your challah will be disaster. It's not possible. I have every ingredient pre-measured. It's not possible. You can't mess up. It's still. Don't limit yourself. Rise above nature. You might be surprised. All right, ladies. I will see you tomorrow. Pickup time is between 10:30 and 12 in the morning, morning, and then between 7 and 8 in the evening. And I look forward to seeing you via Zoom or in person tomorrow. It's going to be wonderful. I get to see you 2 times a month. Have a
Thank
wonderful.
you. Thank you. It was an amazing lesson. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Let's end this.
Thank you.